Hi guys, I'm catching up on reading excerpts from the books I wrote when I was sick this past month. Now I'll read you an excerpt from week 22, that's 4 weeks ago, of Author versus AI, an epic fantasy called Of Seas and Crowns. Some of my books have a prologue, and this one does too, and the prologue is a poem, a sonnet actually. Here it is. It's called The Song of the Prophet. When men and magic get lost on the way, and peace rests lightly o'er crown and new life, stitches holding balance and order will fray to grant darkness dominion over this strife. From outside creation comes threats to the lands, a mirror held up to the might of the king. The protections we sought are not in our hands, and youth will be what destruction can bring. Only a queen will triumph over a queen, but darkness follows each step she must take, with betrayal hidden beneath the unseen and defeat snatched from victory's mistake. No unfettered heart can win in this war, and failure is born from distance afar. This poem ties into the book itself because it's a prophecy of what's to come for the characters. And here we get into chapter 1. I'll skip over the introduction where the main character, Catriona, is introduced and go right to the part of the chapter where the Council of Monarchs begins. All the kings and queens of the realm are seated around the council table. So here we go. Catriana's was by no means the oldest royal house, yet it had existed for centuries more than most. At the far end of the table, nearer the door, were more mortals than magicals, the newer kingdoms. Humans seemed to fight so often and change their boundaries so many times in a generation that it was hard to keep up. Her house had been ruling the oceans for over 50 generations, and there were some human realms that hadn't even been around for 50 years. The seneschal who had been standing behind the throne-like chair of King Nathaniel, the ruler of this land and keeper of the Davmore Accord, took one step forward and banged his staff upon the stone floor with a sound like a bell tolling. The chairs were full, and faces turned toward him as conversations stilled. The 356th meeting of the Greater Kingdoms of Solend is in order. The Honorable Monarch of Hidantia, King Nathaniel III, has the floor. The king rose to his feet and bowed to the assemblage, and received a round of solemn nods from around the table in return. When he sat back down, he wasted no time in outlining what all those assembled already knew. The Davmore Accord had been broken. A rift such as I've never seen, he added in a heavy tone, a crack cutting it nearly in two. The accord was not easily accessible to the public, but every monarch in the room had, at one point, sworn allegiance to it. By crown and by Davmore was a common oath, and not just for royals. I consulted with the most far-seeing of my people, and they all agree that one has entered our realm who does not belong, that the events of the song are coming to pass. Whispers around the room, but Catriona did not indulge in them. Instead, she held her head high and met the eyes of King Nathaniel. He gave her a slight nod in return, but she wasn't sure what he meant by it. Perhaps nothing but an acknowledgement of her presence. As such, we must find our champion, the one in the song who can defeat the interloper queen. And as such, it must be a queen of our own lands, and one who is well versed in our lore and our magics. One who crosses over between the realms of the immortal and mortal, and is welcome in both. A ruler whose realm has been here for the ages, and is known for her wisdom and her might. Catriana's gaze was drawn across the table to the Fey ruler, Queen Aurelia. While there were other queens seated around the table, there were none who so embodied the words of King Nathaniel. Her kingdom was the oldest by far, older even than the realm of the Selkies, and it crossed the boundaries of the mortal realm, being neither of one place or the other. If battling an intruder from another world, there would be none better to do so. Aurelia's neutral blue gaze swept over the assembled royalty. Catriona wasn't the only one whose eyes had turned toward the fairy queen. There are 12 queens in this room, Nathaniel continued, 7 from the magicals and 5 who are human. All 12 are eligible, as you know, so we must choose. What are the rules of choosing? This from a human queen, Mathilde. Her hair was in a white crown around her temples, and she wore no other insignia except her ring of office. She was from one of the mountain fastnesses, and like the Selkies, this group of humans was known for their simplicity in style. 1 vote per kingdom. There were other questions, but none that were significant. When the last one was asked and answered, King Nathaniel stood again. Then I will call upon us to vote as our magics and our hearts see fit. After each name I call, please stand if you support the Queen for your champion. He gestured without looking, and the scribe, who had been sitting at a small table and chair in the corner, stood and bowed, walking forward to wait just slightly behind the king's chair. He would call the tallies, she guessed, and whatever he wrote would go down in history as perhaps the most significant vote ever seen in the greater kingdoms of Solent. Queen Mathilde of the Kingdom of Bacchio. At her name, Mathilde seemed as if she would stand to vote, half rising from her seat. But then she quickly glanced up and down the table. When no one else moved anything but their eyes toward her, she shook her head and settled back into her chair. She was too old, Catriona thought privately. While Mathilde was a steadfast ruler, they needed someone who could meet physical challenges easily and without thought. Queen Upfash of Winterfall. Another mountain kingdom like Mathilde's, although a magical one. It was a realm where it was always winter, and Upfash had a furry white pelt that couldn't be removed, unlike Catriona's. The queen didn't appear bothered when her name was called, and the stoic expression on her face never flickered when she stood, and the king to her right also voted for her. More names were called, and none of the queens got more than 1 or 2 votes, and many got none. Near half the queens were near Mathilde's age and did not receive the confidence of their peers, and one queen was barely more than a child and had a clear gaze unmarked by experience, until there were 2 left. Queen Aurelia of Faye. Catriona stood. Across the table from her, Aurelia's mouth was marked by a slight smile as she looked up at her. To Catriona's surprise, Aurelia didn't take to her own feet, nor did more than a handful of others support her, 3 in total. Catriona sat down puzzled. That meant there wasn't a clear majority cast for any queen. No champion to face the threat that had been foretold in legend and myth. No one until she heard her own name called. The last name, a technicality she had forgotten. The rustling around the room as men and women straightened up and took to their feet was the loudest sound she had ever heard in her life. Her eyes raced over the monarchs. Many were looking back at her, but the sheer number of royalty who were voting for her was astounding. 20. 20 of the 32. And she had not even voted for herself. It is clear we have our champion, King Nathaniel said over the buzzing sound in her astonished ears. Queen Catriona. The 32 royal throats echoed in a shout. Catriona! The heroine has been chosen, so what happens next? Stay tuned to find out. Tomorrow I'll let you know about week 23's book and read a short excerpt from it too. Until then, have a great day.